All right, hey everybody. My name is Dennis Gunthert. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering for Vera, now part of HelpSystems. Today's webinar is about securing your data anywhere. It's an introduction to the Vera platform and what Vera does. I'm going to jump right in. I'll have a Q&A at the end. If you've got questions as they come up, you can go ahead and type them into the questions tab, and then we'll come back around the end and cover those answers. But you can go ahead and start typing them in now if you've got them. That way maybe you don't forget the question that you may want to ask as we go. I'm going to do a brief PowerPoint presentation here talking about what Vera is, what the product does, the reason it exists, and then I'll jump into a very quick demo so you can get a look at what the solution does live and help solidify the concepts that I discussed in the presentation. Pretty simple fact that Vera was really founded on was the fact that your data security should follow your travels. Should follow your files wherever they travel. Modern data moves outside of your organization, outside of the systems that you control. The security that you're using to protect that data should travel as well. Data is everywhere nowadays. Clouds, on-prems, mobile devices. And the limitations of your perimeter security prevent the protection of that data once it travels outside that perimeter. It also becomes more difficult to protect data when you've got an increase in privacy and security regulations such as GDPR or CCPA or HIPAA, or in the case of New York State in the US, NYDFS. And then of course you've got your typical threats, corporate espionage, attacks on information or intellectual property, customer information, which can be sensitive and needs to be secured. So securing sensitive data is difficult, and the challenge has been that most solutions are focused on the systems that the data reside on as opposed to protecting the data itself. If you think about networks protection, you've got firewalls, you've got DLP, you've got CASB solutions that are designed to keep data from leaving the organization, to keep people from getting in. You've got application security, you've got user identity. And instead of, these are all protecting the systems that the data reside on as opposed to protecting the actual data. And as I already mentioned, a lot of times the data has to leave those systems. You've got the first problem of no matter how high or how thick you build those walls, there's a chance that someone's going to be able to breach them. But more importantly, you're throwing data over those walls intentionally all the time, simply out of necessity of doing business. So not only do you have these multiple points, for ingress into your network, you have multiple points of egress for information contained in these files. Cloud collaboration, bring your own device, lots of different ways for data to get in and out. And again, a lot of times it's by necessity that this data is leaving the organization. So the idea behind Vera is to secure the sensitive data at the file level. So wherever that file travels from that point, and for as long as it is needed, that security is attached to the file. So we focus on securing sensitive data in the workflows themselves, as opposed to securing the data in a location where the data has to be used and manipulated in that location. So we start with some sensitive information. Maybe it's PII for customers. Maybe it's PHI. Maybe it's intellectual property that's critical to the organization. Whatever it is, the first layer of protection is encryption. So that content, that file is encrypted with 256-bit AES encryption, pretty much the industry standard for securing data. Each file is encrypted with a unique encryption key. We layer on top of that dynamic access control. Access control simply meaning who is allowed to open that file. There is a specific list of users or groups or even domains that are allowed to open the file. If you are not on the list, you're not allowed to open the file. We enforce that by ensuring that only authorized users get the encryption key to be able to decrypt the file. And you notice the word dynamic in front of that access control. That means that permissioning, that access control list, can not only be configured at the time you secure the file, but it can be modified at any point afterwards. You can add users to the access control list. You can remove users from the access control list. So if I share a file with a bunch of people and I decide 3 weeks from now that several of those people should no longer have access, I can remove their access to that file. And the idea of having the security follow the file, it doesn't matter where that file has traveled within, anywhere in the world. The users that I have revoked access from will never be able to open that file again, unless I go back in and grant them access to it again. And then finally, on top of all that, we do the encryption, we do the access control list, we then layer what Vera refers to as active file security, which is in-use protection. What is the user allowed to do with the file while they have it, have it open? Are they allowed to copy and paste from that file? Are they allowed to print the file? Are they even allowed to edit the file? All of those things can be controlled for those users. So I can specify, I'm going to share this file with this person. They cannot edit, they cannot copy paste, they cannot print. And just like the access control, I can modify those permissions at any time in the future. So if I share a file with someone and I give them the permission to edit that file, somewhere down the line, I can decide, well, I want to change that. I want to switch so that they can only view the file if they're no longer able to edit the file. So it allows you to secure sensitive data, continue to take advantage of modern collaboration platforms like Dropbox or Box or SharePoint, and it allows you to reduce the risk of exposure of that sensitive data, whether it's, again, PII, PHI, intellectual property, and it reduces the overhead, because what you'll see as we go forward through the demonstration is automations that significantly reduce the burden of administering those access control lists and those policies, and in many cases make introduction of the solution very transparent and seamless for the end user. The highlights here are going to be the security travels with the files. Okay? So imagine a situation where you've got a file out in SharePoint or OneDrive, and you share that file with someone. That file's been secured by Vera. They download that file from OneDrive. OneDrive is great, Box, Dropbox, they're all great for ensuring that only authorized users can get into those folders and see the files that are in those folders. They're great for determining whether or not the user can edit the version of the file that's in that folder, or add or remove things from that folder. But as soon as they are able to move that file outside of that repository, they download the file from OneDrive or Box or Dropbox or SharePoint, or a network share for that matter. As soon as that file leaves that particular repository, without a solution like Vera, all bets are off, because they're able to do whatever they want with that file, including expose it to other users that never had access to the original repository in the first place. With Vera, the security travels with that file wherever it moves. Vera will support encryption and access control for any file type. We support viewing those encrypted files, those secure files, on iOS, on Android, on Windows, on Mac. You have dynamic granular control of the access control list and the permissioning with little to no overhead, administratively or on the end user, which I'll show you. And you have a very intuitive, low friction end user experience that I'll show you here in just a moment as well. So it sounds too good to be true, but hopefully we're gonna prove that out here in just a minute. So what Vera is really designed to do here is to bridge the gap between security and usability. One of the account executives that I've worked with for years, he commonly says, security that is hard to use is security that will go unused. If the security solution that you're trying to implement and trying to put in place is overly burdensome on the end user, they're going to start trying to find ways to work around that solution. So we want to avoid that by making it as seamless and as simple as possible for end users to use these tools. And as I kind of touched on a little bit already, Vera actually will complement your security ecosystem. I mentioned that there are essentially gaps in those different tools, CASBs, DLPs, etc. That doesn't mean they have no place in your environment. There are plenty of pieces of information that should never leave the organization. And that's what you have something like a DLP for. There may be certain categories of data that should never be stored out in a cloud solution like Dropbox or Box. And that's what your CASB solutions are still good for. Classification. Classification is still a requirement. And you still want to be able to identify data and determine where that data is within your organization. So Vera complements these. We don't consider Vera a replacement for these solutions, but as a complement to them. Hopefully the benefits of the data-centric approach to file security that I've been kind of discussing are fairly self-evident. I've kind of woven them through what we've been discussing already. Access control. You're preventing unauthorized access to confidential data no matter where it's traveled in the world. It stays with that data. That security, that protection stays with the data throughout the life cycle of that content. You've got the ability to modify that protection at any point during that life cycle. And then finally, the one thing that we haven't touched on too much so far, but I'll really highlight when we get into the demo, is the security automation. Vera allows for intelligent security workflows across your business ecosystem. Being able to take advantage of the solution performing some actions and performing securing of the files automatically without the need to rely on end users to secure the data. Now, while you can rely on the end users, most of our customers are going to rely on the automations that we have within the product. So how does Vera work? Well, we really have a core component called the Vera tenant. It's basically the instance of Vera. That is a hosted solution. It's going to be housed within the Vera infrastructure. But one of the things that's really important to note right off the bat for anybody that has concerns, Vera never stores the content of the files that we're talking about. Vera is not a data sharing platform. Okay? So the Vera tenant, that hosted portion of the solution, is only storing information about what files have been secured and who has access to them and what their permissions are, as opposed to ever storing the data itself. And then the integrations, the automations we have allow for securing of files, storage of secure files anywhere. Vera is completely agnostic as to where a secure file is housed. I could secure a Vera protected file and I could put that file anywhere. That is completely independent of the Vera solution itself. And then as I share that file around, whether it's with internal users or external users, those users, when they go to access that file, the system will communicate back to the Vera tenant to check for their permissions. And if they are allowed permissions, then they're given access to the file. If they do not have access to the file, then they never get the access or the encryption key to decrypt the file and access it. And all of this is administered through the Vera Dashboard, which again is a hosted solution, a cloud-based solution with full audit tracking and the ability to integrate into existing SIEM solutions. So not only do you have this protection, but you have an audit trail and a full picture of who's accessing your data, how often they're accessing, where they're accessing it from. And that can then be defensible. If you need to prove that there has not been a breach of particular pieces of data, if those files were protected by Vera, you can show very specifically who accessed those files and when. And finally, I want to circle back to that first point I made and reiterate the customer data, the file data, is never stored on Vera systems. So the top drivers for customers, what is it that really impels customers to purchase? Well, it's enabling secure cloud collaboration. Right? Again, those solutions typically don't provide protection for that last mile between that repository and the end user. If the user downloads the file from Box or Dropbox or OneDrive or SharePoint, you've lost control over the data. And Vera is able to cover that last mile. Leads directly into the second point, which is protecting sensitive data used by employees or particularly external third parties. Being able to share content securely with a third party, and at any point in the future, be able to revoke that access. And then finally, the ability to mitigate compliance risks. Whether it's ensuring that only authorized individuals that you intentionally share data out with are able to access those files, but you can even mitigate those compliance risks through the use of the audit trail that I mentioned. If you have internal information only that's secured by Vera, and you have a breach of those systems, let's say you have someone gets into your network file share and extracts a bunch of data. Typically in the compliance world, if that information was sensitive and covered by regulations, you are going to be reporting and potentially paying a fine on every single file that could have been accessed during that breach, even if there's no indication that anybody ever actually looked at the file. You have to make the assumption that the content, the data was compromised. Whereas if you have Vera in place and you have a breach of that network share, and even if someone copies, right, a bad actor copies that data off of your network, you then have a defensible audit trail to go back and be able to say, okay, we've gone through all our network logs and done a forensic analysis of our network, and we know that the breach happened and that these locations may have been compromised. But we also have this audit log from Vera that says none of these files have been accessed. We know that that data has not been looked at, even though we can't necessarily say where that data is in the world, where that file is in the world. So being able to mitigate that risk of, again, making sure that only when you do share things intentionally, only authorized users can open it, but even when you have those unintentional breaches, that you can defend whether or not that file was ever accessed. Now, as far as who's using Vera, it covers pretty much all verticals, but really if you focus in on the ones that are most common for us, it's going to be the ones where it's either PII or PHI or intellectual property. So healthcare, of course, is an obvious choice with the personal health information. Media and entertainment is a big factor for us because of things like, intellectual property when it comes to those entertainment shows. If you think, HBO at the very top of the list, if you think back to a few years ago when they had the leak of the Game of Thrones episodes, you think about someone like the NBA. The NBA, you're talking about very sensitive data for player information, player financial information, personal details, addresses, phone numbers, etc. Even down at the bottom of the list, Pokemon, new releases. They want to prevent leaks of upcoming content. Manufacturing, engineering, again, an intellectual property issue. You want to be able to protect the content, your intellectual property, the design drawings, the upcoming releases for different products or different solutions, or even very new innovations. For example, Nike is a great example here. According to in our talks with Nike has calculated that they typically lose somewhere between 5 and 10% immediately off the top of their revenue because of knockoffs of a new shoe, right? Because of counterfeits, they understand and they realize that they're going to lose that much revenue because of copies of a shoe. And then, of course, financial services is going to be more about PII, personal financial data, identifying information like U.S. Social Security numbers and so forth. Quick overview or quick summary of what Vera is all about: secure, track, revoke, and control. The ability to secure that data wherever it goes on any device, security that follows that file for for the life of its existence. Control over access by both internal and external users. That complements your existing solution rather than trying to replace your existing security infrastructure. And allows you to maintain control of that intellectual property or sensitive information. So hopefully that paints a pretty good picture of what Vera does in general. But now I want to jump over and start going into a very quick demo of the solution to really drive home and really just, kind of highlight what that functionality looks like and tie this all together. So I have two systems that I'm going to be working off of. One is kind of my base operating system here that you now see. I am now on the Vera Dashboard. This is the administrative console, the hosted portion of the solution that I talked about. And once again, I'm going to stress we do not store the file data. We're merely storing information about what files have been secured and who's got access to them. So you can see here on the dashboard, I get some summary information about things that are happening, the files that are being accessed the most, what files are being, that were the most unauthorized access attempts, who's trying to open files that they shouldn't, what file is most often being opened or trying to be opened that can't be. So just some summary information, and we'll jump back here to in a minute. But first, I'm going to switch over to my desktop here, which is just a Windows desktop solution, where we're going to go through most of the usage and what this experience actually looks like. Now, on this Windows desktop, I do have a Vera desktop client installed. So you can see it down here on the system tray. I've got the client installed. Just like you can see, I also have the Dropbox client. I have OneDrive. I have the Box client. So Vera is just another desktop client similar to those. I am logged in. I am authenticated against that client. So it knows who I am. I have established my identity. This client, by the way, is not required in order to be able to work with Vera protected files. It makes for a very seamless solution and very transparent solution for the end users if it is installed, but it is not required. So particularly in the case of those third-party users that you might share data with, they do not have to install the Vera client. We understand that many users cannot or will not install software on their machine. You're not going to be able to dictate many times to that third party, oh, you have to install this piece of software. So rather than trying to dictate that, we want to make sure that they're able to open those files even without the client installed, and I will show you what that experience looks like. But again, having the client installed makes this for a very seamless and integrated solution from the end user experience. One of the things that it allows me to do is secure files in the first place. It's not required to secure files, but it does allow me to do things like right-click on a file and choose to secure it. So you can see I have this PDF on my desktop. I right-click on it. I now have this option to secure that file with Vera. Now, most of our customers do not rely on the end users to do this manually. I highlight this to show that it is possible for a user to manually choose to protect a file, but more importantly, to introduce a couple of key concepts. The first concept I've already discussed is what we call the access control list. Who is allowed to open this file? And I can define this now as I secure it. I don't have to, but I can. And I can define access based on particular users, an entire domain, groups that may be synchronized from things like Active Directory or Ping or Okta, or I can just grant access to anyone who verifies their identity. To be able to start identifying those users, I'm going to simply use email addresses as their unique identifier. When I'm adding these users, I do not have to worry about whether or not they exist within my Vera tenant. So for example, if I wanted to choose some people that are attending this webinar, I could simply start typing in your email address. I don't have to call my administrator, my Vera administrator, and ask them to create an account for you. I don't have to have you go sign up for an account with Vera. I can simply type in your email address and it will handle it just fine. And then I can go ahead and share that file with you. Once I've chosen who I want to be able to access this file, I can then add what we call a policy, which is the permissions the user will have on that file when they open it. You can see a list here. These are example policies. You're by no means limited to these policies. There are some policies that are built in by default that you can modify, or you can create your own custom policies. And each one of these is a collection of different permissions. I don't have to have them memorized. If I hover over the policy, it will tell me kind of the highlights. So if you look at this track policy now that I've got highlighted, you'll notice it's very permissive. James, who I grant access to this file, will be able to edit the file. They will be able to do a save as and create new copies of the file. They will be able to print the file. They will be able to copy and paste the file, or copy and paste out of the file. So it's pretty permissive. Now, maybe I don't want to give James that much control over the file, so I'll give him the collaborate policy instead. You can see it's much more restrictive. It doesn't say anything about copy, paste, or save as, or printing. It will allow him to edit the file, but it will also add a watermark that the track policy does not have. And then you'll also notice there's an offline timeout. So James could open this file even if he's offline, if he does not have an internet connection, but you notice he can only be offline for up to 180 minutes. If he's offline more than 3 hours, he'll no longer be able to access the file until he comes back online. And the idea there is that it's allowing, in essence, the file to check back in to make sure that James's access hasn't been modified or revoked in that time frame. Finally, if we look at the view-only policy, it's even more restrictive. You notice there's no edit capability. There's actually a notification. I will be notified by email when James opens this file. He does have offline access, but this time it's restricted to 60 minutes, and there's still a watermark. These policies, while each user is granted a specific policy, because the policy is a complete collection, I can grant different policies to different users on the same file. So I could share the file with half a dozen people and give half of them the collaborate policy and the other half the view-only policy. I don't have to create two separate versions of the file with those permission sets. I simply add everybody to the access control list for the file and give them those different policies, and then send them all the exact same file. And as I touched on before, at any time, I can come back in and either modify that policy or revoke access entirely. Now, spent a lot of time talking about this, but once I just type in some email addresses or choose from my address book or enter in a group and I assign a policy, I hit secure. At that point, Vera is going to encrypt that file with that 256-bit AES encryption that I talked about. It's going to create a unique encryption key for this file, encrypt the file in that key, with that key. It's then actually going to add an HTML wrapper around the file. So we're just going to take the encrypted content, we're going to pad the front of it with an HTML header, and we're actually going to add a .html extension to the end of the file, because that will make it a universal carrier, basically using HTML as an envelope for the encrypted content. So all of that happens when I hit the secure button, and it will take this file, this PDF here, and replace it with the encrypted version that we create. But instead of doing that, I'm not going to actually secure the file. I'm going to cancel out of this, because the other thing that we allow users to do, or allow companies to do, is to implement automation of the encryption process. The ability to say, I want to secure these files when certain things happen. One of the primary ways that customers are going to do that is through the integration that we have with various repositories. So it could be network shares, and as I've already mentioned, it could be things like SharePoint, OneDrive, Box, or Dropbox. You can create rules that say, I want to protect files that are stored in these locations. Or more typically, I want to protect files that are stored in particular folders in those locations. So just to give you a quick example, if I open up this box, my box synced folder, I have a couple of folders here. I have a rule, the administrator has a rule says that any file that I drop into that external sharing folder out on Box is going to get encrypted automatically. In addition, any file that gets dropped in there is not only going to get encrypted automatically, but the access control will be assigned automatically as well. Anybody that's a member of that folder is automatically added to the access control list. And then they are granted a policy that is based on their folder permission. So if they have edit rights to the folder, they will, for example, get the collaborate policy. If they have view-only rights to the folder, they will get the view-only policy. As an end user, I don't have to think about who should get access to this file or what policy they should get. I'm just dropping a file into that folder. And just like the permissions to the folder are assigned automatically, and I don't have to think about that as an end user, the permissions to the file will be assigned automatically. And that permissioning is dynamic. So if at some point down the road, a new user is added to this folder, they will be automatically added to the access control list for the files in that folder. Or if someone's access to the folder is revoked, their access to the individual files will be revoked. Now, remember, the security travels with the file. So if I have someone that's a member of this folder, they are on the access control list for the files in that folder, and they download those files to their local machine, they're able to access those files with the security in place. If we then go and revoke their access to the folder, we will revoke their access to the individual files, which means even the individual copies of the files that are sitting on their local machine will no longer be accessible to them. And that's a critical concept to understand here, is that even though that folder no longer, or sorry, that file no longer resides in the box folder, it's been downloaded locally, we still have control over what that user is able to do with it, or even whether or not they can access it. So as an example of that automation, I could take, for example, I could take this PDF. I have a local folder here on my desktop that's set up as well. So I can just drag and drop that PDF into that folder, and it will automatically be secured because there is a rule set up to do so. The administrator has set up a rule. I don't think my desktop cooperated. The administrator has set up a rule. Sorry, I'm not sure what's going on with my virtual machine. Let me try this again here. There we go. So I drag and drop the file into that folder, and you can see it automatically gets protected. Of course, now the virtual machine is caught up, so I have 2 copies of it. But it's automatically protected. I didn't have to go through that exercise of right-clicking on the file and choosing to secure it with Vera. It was automatically protected. And I actually have a little visual indicator to show me that. You can see that little blue-green bar across the file icon. That is just a simple, quick indicator that the file is protected. Now, you can turn that off if you want. But in this case, it just makes it really easy to tell that the file's been secure. Now, as far as what it's like to work with that file, with the Vera client installed, it just becomes simple. I double click on the file, and it's gonna open, in this case, in Adobe Reader, or whatever the native application is. Now, as the person that secured this file, I have complete access to it. I really don't see any difference whatsoever. On the other hand, if I open a different file, for example, if I open this Word document I am not the owner of. So we'll see that when we open this file, we get a very different experience. Now, what was going on there? Right? What we didn't realize, what we didn't really see happening when I go to open that file is it's actually the Vera client is opening that file. It's looking at the file. There's a unique document ID for this file. It's checking with the Vera tenant to see if I have permission to open this file. If it does, it securely transmits the encryption key. The Vera client uses that encryption key to decrypt the file content, opens Word, and passes Word that decrypted data stream. And then the client then remains in the background to apply the policy. And you can see a very visual indicator of the policy enforcement on the watermark. That watermark is not embedded in the file. It's applied by the client, which means it's dynamic. So in this case, we're looking at the watermark. The watermark is the email address of the person that is viewing the file. You don't have to create, again, different versions of the file for different users so that it shows their email address. You send the same file to every single person, and when they open it, it will be their email address that is displayed. You can see the watermark is pretty prevalent. If you want to make it a little less prevalent, or if you want to change the orientation, you can certainly do that as part of the policy. The other quick visual indicator that the file is secure is what we call the Vera policy bar here. Now I can drag this around wherever I want within the application window. But you notice there's also this little triangle here. And if I click on that little triangle, it'll expand out to show me what my permissions to this file are. And you can see I don't really have any. I can't edit, I can't copy paste, I can't print. And if I try to do any of those things, I will get a message telling me that I'm not allowed to. So I can't decide, oh, well, I can't edit this and I can't print it, so I'll just copy and paste it into a brand new Word document. Well, no, I won't, because the owner of this file has not given me the permission to copy and paste. So while I can access this file and view it, I can't edit it or extract the data out of it. If the owner of the file had given me the edit permission, I would be able to edit this file, but would still not be able to extract the data out of it. I could make changes to it, I could save those changes. Those changes, those saves would still be secure. It would still be encrypted, but I'm able to collaborate on the file even while it's still protected. Now, this is that client-based experience that I talked about, the ability to open that file in the native application with the Vera client installed on the desktop, because the client is handling the decryption process. But what if the user that you're sharing with does not have the Vera client installed? Well, that's where that HTML wrapper that I mentioned comes in. So if I take a look at one of these files, if I force this file to open up in, for example, Notepad, you'll see that HTML header that I talked about. So that's all of this part here. And then down below that, we start getting into this kind of crazy gibberish. That's the encrypted content. Now, if I don't have the Vera client installed and I go to an HTML file and I double click on it, my operating system is going to do what it normally does. It's going to open that file in my browser. And once again, that's why we use that HTML wrapper. As I said, it becomes a universal carrier. So if I go to open a file that's protected by Vera and I don't have the client installed, it's going to open in my browser, and this will be my experience. It's going to tell me that this file is protected by Vera. Now, in my case, since I have the Vera client installed, it's actually telling me I can just view this in its native application. If I did not have the Vera client installed, it would give me the option to download the app. But maybe I don't want to do that, or I can't download and install the app. So I've got the option here of just viewing the secured file. In this case, though, we need to establish my identity. Remember, with the client, I'd already established my identity. I was already authenticated. So here, I'm going to need to define who I am. And I need to authenticate myself. Now, I can do that through a password, which is what I will do in my case, or I could do it with something as simple as an email verification link or a verification code. There are a bunch of different ways to authenticate a user that you can specify as as the administrators. You can determine what the authentication path is, but we are not going to let someone see a file until they have established their identity and proven who they are, and we have checked that identity against the access control list for that file. If we've confirmed their identity and if they're on the access control list, then we're going to do all of the same things we did with the client, except now we're doing it in the browser. We're going to check to see if they have access to the file. We're going to securely transmit the encryption key. We're going to decrypt the file. We're going to present the file. In this case, we're just using the browser as the application. Remember, this file is not being delivered from Vera. Vera is not storing the content of this file. This was a file that was on our local hard drive that we opened. We're just using the browser as the application to open that file. But now I can view this file. I can look at the information. You notice the watermark is still there. In this case, it's a more sparse watermark because I have a different policy. If I click on the little logo here, you'll see that I actually have edit rights to this file. And I can edit this file in the browser. So with that, even without the Vera client installed, I'm able to not only view files that have been shared with me that are secured by Vera, but I can even edit those files if I have that permission. Now, we'll freely admit this is a little bit more friction for an end user, but it does allow for that protection. It does allow for that access, even without requiring that Vera client. Now, if that external user wants to and is able to download and install the Vera client, they're more than welcome to. Completely able to download that client and install it themselves, and then they could, just like your internal users, those external users would be able to open these secure files in the native application. So the whole idea here, again, is making sure that data, wherever it goes, I download a file from Box that's secured by Vera. I put it onto a USB. I take it halfway across the world and I plug it into a computer and I bring that file open. That security is still there. If my access to that file has been revoked in the meantime, I will not be able to open that file. And that access control is simple. All I need to do is I just go in and I right-click on those files. If I'm the file owner, or administrators can do this through the admin console, and I can manage that access after the fact. This is going to look exactly like the screen that we saw before when we were securing the file in the first place, but now I can go in here and I can edit access. So in this case, if I decide I do not want dgunthert@vera.com to access this file anymore, I can simply click that button and that access will be revoked, and dgunthert@vera will never be able to open this file again. I don't care if he has it on a USB. I don't care if it's sitting on his computer at home. I don't care if he has it downloaded to his phone. He's never going to be able to open this file again. It's just a useless bunch of ones and zeros at that point. So being mindful of the time coming up on the 45 minutes we had planned, I will stick around for several minutes afterwards to go through any Q&A that people have, but I want to point out the audit log for all of this. Everything that's happening is going to be tracked. So if we go and look at this audit log, we can see all of the access information. If I jump into a particular file, maybe I want to see just the information, just the audit information for that Word document that we were looking at, I can do so. So I can jump in here and I can see who secured the file. I can see when it was secured. I can see who currently has access to that file. And I can look at the activity log for this file. So I can see exactly who has opened it and what they've been doing. So remember when we tried to copy and paste and we weren't allowed to, that's going to be logged as part of this. I can see when we were looking at that file for just over 2.5 minutes. So all of this information is part of this audit log, and we can deliver this information into a SIM solution like Splunk or Logarithm or QRadar, so that you can actually have just a single pane of glass along with all of your other systems for monitoring. And we can export this information as well. So you have this audit log. This is that defensible part that I talked about, to be able to see, not only control who's been accessing the file and what they can do with it, but then actually go back and look at who's been accessing it and what they've been doing, or who's been trying to access files when they shouldn't be. So I appreciate everybody's time today. I'm going to stop right there in terms of the actual content, the presentation, but I am going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in there. I've got quite a few of them here already. So I'm just going to run through these. Hopefully everybody will be able to stick around a little bit. We'll go through these questions. So one of the questions was, first question was the user, I'm having trouble looking my, sorry. So first question I see here is where is the Vera instance located in the world? So the Vera instance at this currently is located within AWS. We house the infrastructure within several regions of AWS in the US. We are not currently deployed to any other AWS regions outside of the US. That is something we're looking into, but currently they are all within AWS within the US. Next question was, which dialog box pops up when you don't have the Vera client installed? So I want to make sure that I'm clear here. You won't have a dialog box if you don't have the client installed. If you're trying to open a Vera protected file, if you double click on a file to open it, it's a Vera protected file, it's going to immediately open in the browser. And you'll see that, in essence, that landing page that says this is a Vera secured file, where you have the option to click on and view that secured file, and it'll take you through that authentication workflow that we looked at. So there's not really a dialog box per se, again, because there's no client running. But if I do go to open a Vera protected file without the client installed, it will open in my browser. Someone asked, is the technology able to prevent taking a screenshot, to take a print screen? And the answer is yes, although with a slight qualifier. We don't prevent the operating system from taking a screenshot, but we do gray out the protected application window. So for example, when I was looking at those files before, if I had the policy that I was using had screen capture disabled, you actually would not have been able to see the Word document. You wouldn't have been able to see the Word document because while Vera wouldn't have prevented Windows, the operating system, from capturing that portion of the screen, the Vera client would have overlaid just a gray box over the Word window. So blocking screen capture, and that includes not only operating systems print screens, but also tools like GoToMeeting or WebEx or Camtasia. You can prevent those tools from capturing the portion of the screen that has Vera protected content. So another follow-up question, same one, was very similar. What will happen if you print screen the window of a protected document? It's going to depend on what the policy permission is. Someone was asking if they don't have a Microsoft license, would they be able to edit the file? And the answer is yes. So when we were looking at that view in browser, that browser-based view, if I do not have the Vera client installed and I have the edit permission, I can edit that file in the browser, and it does not require me to have a Microsoft Office license. As far as pricing policy goes, the solution is priced per user. We do not require that you deploy it globally. So if you have a subset of users in the organization that you want to be able to protect and access Vera protected files, you can license for that user count. And we do not count external users in that count. So it's going to be for internal users, and in essence, users that you manage the identity of, and then external users are not included in that license count. Are there any limitations with regards to non-English languages, OS, and environment? There are not limitations on the solution in terms of non-English environments or non-English operating systems, but the Vera documentation, the Vera screen, the Vera pop-ups, etc., are all currently in English only. Again, that's something that, especially now that we've been acquired by HelpSystems, the product team is working towards, but right now everything within the Vera solution is English only. Where can you get pricing from? I guarantee you, and I can assure you and promise that we will be following up with the attendees, and you'll be able to get in contact with one of the account executives that'll be able to discuss pricing. Does the solution support on-prem deployment? And the answer is primarily no. I mentioned that Vera tenant. That tenant will always be hosted. There are on-premise components that either can be or must be deployed, virtual appliances that would operate within the customer environment, depending on the particular implementation and configuration. One of those that can be deployed on-premise is the key store. So while the kind of that audit information and the information about what files are secured is always going to be hosted, customers do have the ability to locally deploy the encryption key store themselves. Is the web viewer compatible with AutoCAD? It is not. We do support AutoCAD for securing and for active file security. However, if you are working with secure AutoCAD files, in that case, you will need to have the client installed. The AutoCAD, simply because of the complexity of the files and the rendering, viewing AutoCAD files is not supported in the browser. Does Vera support Arabic file names? The answer is yes. Again, the Vera interface is going to be English only, but there's no restrictions on, again, the operating system or file name language. Next question: would Vera complement or compete with SailPoint File Access Manager? I'll be honest, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the SailPoint File Access Manager. My assumption is that it will not compete with File Access Manager just by the name itself. I'm assuming that's being able to get to particular files. Remember, the simple way to kind of answer the question, I don't know it specifically myself, but does File Access Manager allow that last mile control of a file? If someone does have access to a file, are they able to pull it out of that solution and take it somewhere else? And if they can take it out and take it somewhere else, is that solution still able to control what they can do with it? If the answer is yes, then I would say yes, it does compete with Vera. But if the answer is no, then it's not a competition. in the same way that a DLP is not a competition, is not competition to Vera. A DLP can prevent a solution from leaving your environment. It can prevent a file from leaving your environment. It can prevent someone from emailing a file with social security numbers. That's what DLP is for. However, if it does allow it, or if it's content that the DLP does allow through, then that's where Vera can protect it. So they're not competitive in that sense, they're complementary. Is there any way to integrate with a CDR to decrypt the files before deep scanning? Potentially, yes. This would probably be a case where you would potentially be able to use the Vera software development kit and APIs in order to do so. So we have customers that are doing some customization. We have customers that do integrations with their enterprise content management solutions to automatically protect data that's coming out of those content management solutions, or to protect data, to unprotect data as it's going back in. And that in fact is the same technology that, for example, we have with our integration with Titus classification. Titus can still classify Vera protected content because it can use the SDK to decrypt the file, look at the content, and then re-encrypt the file if necessary. Question: is there any limit to installing agents on third-party users for cat editing? There is not. Again, we do not. Anybody can download the Vera client, and we do not license based on that external user count, whether they're using the Vera client or not. One more question here. How is the bottom line? How is the file being shared or sent? Simple answer: we don't care. We have nothing to do with that. It could be sent via message over Slack. It could be sent via FTP. It could be shared out over Box or Dropbox. It could be downloaded to USB and thrown across the office. We don't care how the file travels from one place to another. And to be very candid, we don't protect or restrict the file from traveling from one place to another. What we care about is who's accessing it once it gets there, or who's able to access it once it gets there. Right. So I have a couple more popping up. Is there any integration with Go Anywhere? Managed file transfer? Not at this point, but that, as you can imagine, now that Vera is part of the HelpSystems family, that is very high on the product roadmap list, is to provide deep integration with Go Anywhere, even deeper integration with Titus, integration with ClearSwift and all the other products within the HelpSystems data security platform. Hope everybody follows this lead. We have one attendee out there saying, "I love it. Take my money." We'd be happy to. Again, we'll be following up with everybody after this, after the webinar is concluded. Will antivirus scanning work on protected files? If you have a protected file, and then is antivirus going to be able to scan that? And the answer gets a bit complicated, but for the most part, a file at rest, not really, right? Because the data is going to be protected. It's going to be encrypted. The virus scanning solution is not going to be able to read that. Now, that's not going to prevent the virus scanning tool from being able to view the file as it's being accessed, to be able to scan the file as it's being opened and being passed off to that application. And then we do have some integration with other tools, that will allow for scanning. It's really a matter of, we'll work with just about anybody that we can. Right? We are encrypting the content. Whatever the solution is, whether it's antivirus or a CASB or a DLP or whatever the solution is, the general answer is that it's not going to be able to read the encrypted data because it doesn't have access. However, we're more than willing to partner with those organizations to be able to make it so that they can. So for example, that's what we do with Titus. We've done that with Netscope. We've done that with Symantec for DLP. Those solutions can encrypt content, right? So for example, you can have Titus encrypt something automatically if it receives a particular classification. You can have Netscope go out and scan Dropbox, and if it finds certain content instead of quarantining or deleting it, it can simply encrypt it in place. But those solutions can also view protected content. So it can scan something that's already been protected, look inside of it, and then re-protect it if necessary. Can the files be opened with on mobile devices? The answer is yes, although it will require the Vera mobile app. Again, because we have to have some way of being able to check access, retrieve the encryption key, do the decryption. So the answer is yes, but it does require that the Vera app be installed. Okay. And I think most of the other ones have been addressed. A lot of them are, just interests, follow-up interest that we'll be following up on. But I think I've addressed most of the technical questions. We've got about 2 minutes left. If you did have a technical question and I didn't answer it, please throw it back in there real quick, and we'll address it as quickly as possible. But other than that, thank you for attending today. I appreciate everybody's time and attention. I appreciate all the great questions that we wrapped up with. And as I said, we'll be following up and reaching back out for those of you that have expressed interest. I will stick around. I'll leave this open. I'll leave the Q&A open for a couple of more minutes if you do want to ask any additional questions. But other than that, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.